For 12 years, no one knew what she did every single night. To her neighbors, coworkers, and even her closest friends, Clara seemed like just another quiet woman with a simple life. But behind that quiet routine was a secret, a heavy, heartbreaking truth that she carried alone, out of love. What would make someone hide the most important person in their life from the whole world? How far would you go to protect a memory, a bond, a promise whispered on a deathbed? Clara chose silence. She chose sacrifice. But when the truth finally came out, it didn't just change her life. It shook everyone around her. Stay with me until the end, because this story will move you deeply. Clara was only 22 when it all began. She was just months away from graduating college, full of plans and dreams that finally felt within reach. But one late-night phone call turned her entire world upside down. Her father, the man she hadn't seen in over 5 years, had been hospitalized in critical condition. He had been diagnosed with a degenerative disease that would slowly take away his mobility, his speech, and eventually, his memory. To most people, he was just a reclusive, bitter man who had chosen to push his daughter away after his wife died. But to Clara, he was still the dad who told bedtime stories, made pancakes on Sundays, and called her my brave little girl. The decision she made in that hospital room changed the entire course of her life. Clara skipped her graduation, turned down the dream job offer she had worked so hard for, and rented a small house in the suburbs, close to the hospital. She didn't tell a soul, not even her best friend. She brought her father home to live with her, and from that moment on, she lived a double life. By day, she worked as a cashier at a local grocery store. By night, she became a caregiver, a nurse, a therapist, all rolled into one. She changed diapers, bathed him, fed him, and, when the disease made him lash out in confusion or fear, she held him until it passed. It was like caring for a child trapped in a man's body, a man who sometimes didn't even remember who she was. As the years went by, Clara's life became a loop of silent routines. The neighbors thought she lived alone. Some even commented on how tired she always looked, but no one suspected a thing. She became an expert at making excuses. I'm too exhausted from work to go out. My place is a mess, let's hang at yours. A trip? No way, I'm broke. Lying was easier than trying to explain. After all, who would understand a choice like this? Who could possibly accept that she had erased herself from the world out of love for a man who barely remembered her name? Some nights after he finally fell asleep and the house went still, Clara would cry in the shower. It wasn't regret. It was just exhaustion, the kind that sank deep into her bones. But even on the hardest days, she never considered walking away. She remembered the promise she had made to her mother on her deathbed when she was just a teenager. Take care of him, Clara. He'll need you. And she did. With a strength she didn't know she had. With a love that wasn't always returned but was never conditional. The hardest part was watching his memory fade, like sand slipping through her fingers. At first he still remembered a few things. He called her by name, asked about school, even told old jokes. But as time passed, he forgot. First her name, then that she was his daughter. Eventually, he couldn't even recall his own. In those moments, she would hold his hand and whisper, "It's okay, Dad. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He didn't understand the words, but somehow he felt her presence. And in a way, that was enough. For 12 years, Clara lived between two worlds. The outside world where she was invisible, and the secret world where she was the guardian of her father's fading light. Until one day, something happened. Something she could have never predicted. And that moment changed everything. It started with a knock at the door on a rainy afternoon. Clara wasn't expecting anyone, and visitors were rare. She almost didn't answer, but something in her gut told her to check. When she opened it, there stood a young man, maybe 25, soaked from head to toe, holding a folder in his hands. His name was Ethan. He introduced himself politely, explaining he was doing community outreach for a new healthcare program targeting long-term caregivers. Clara froze. No one had ever come close to discovering her truth, and now here was this stranger, standing on her porch holding something that sounded dangerously close to her reality. Ethan was persistent but gentle. He asked if she knew anyone who might benefit from resources for in-home caregiving. Clara wanted to slam the door and forget he ever showed up, but something about his voice, the quiet empathy in it, made her pause. "I'm just trying to reach people who feel like they've been forgotten," he said. That hit her hard, because that's exactly how she felt. Forgotten. Erased. Like her life didn't matter as long as her father's needs were met. She didn't invite him in, but she didn't forget him either. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words in her head. For the first time in years, someone had spoken directly to the part of her she kept buried. She didn't know why it bothered her so much. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the realization that somewhere deep down she wanted to be seen, wanted to be acknowledged, even if only by a stranger who showed up in the rain. A week later, Ethan returned. This time he brought pamphlets, information about support groups, mental health services, and even financial aid programs for caregivers. Clara didn't open the door, but she watched from the window as he gently slid the envelope under the doormat and walked away. She waited until nightfall before retrieving it. She sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in her lap, staring at it for hours before she finally opened it. Each word felt like it was written for her, and for the first time in a long time she cried for herself. The next day, something shifted in Clara. She went about her routine as always, feeding her father, helping him bathe, giving him his medication. But there was a new heaviness in her chest. She couldn't unsee the truth Ethan had brought to her doorstep. That maybe she didn't have to keep doing this alone. That maybe asking for help didn't mean she was failing. Still, fear held her back. What if someone found out about her father? What if they tried to take him away? She couldn't risk it. Not after all these years, but fate doesn't wait for us to be ready. Sometimes it forces our hand. And the next event would push Clara to the very edge of everything she thought she could handle. One evening, Clara came home from her shift and immediately sensed something was wrong. The house was unusually quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. She called out for her father, but there was no response. Panic surged through her as she raced to his room only to find it empty. The front door was unlocked. Her heart pounded in her chest as she searched the entire house, calling his name louder and more frantically with each passing second. And then she saw it, the faint shape of his slippers in the wet dirt just beyond the porch. He had wandered off. Clara ran through the neighborhood like a storm, asking everyone she passed if they'd seen an older man in pajamas. The streets blurred around her as the hours dragged on. Just as she was about to call the police, her phone rang. A woman from a nearby gas station had spotted him, confused, shivering, and trying to pay for a bottle of water with a button. Clara rushed over, her chest aching, eyes swollen from crying. When she got there and saw him sitting in a corner, hunched over and mumbling to himself, something inside her cracked. He looked so small, so lost. And she realized that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't protect him from everything. Back home, she wrapped him in blankets and held his hand for hours, trying not to let him see the tears running down her face. That night, after he finally fell asleep, Clara made a decision. She picked up Ethan's pamphlet and called the number printed at the bottom. Her voice trembled as she asked about the support group, unsure of what she was even looking for. But the woman on the other end didn't rush her. She just listened, and that was enough. For the first time in 12 years, Clara felt like someone had truly heard her. At the first support group meeting, she sat in silence, listening to others talk about their burnout, their fear, their guilt. Every word mirrored her own life. There were people caring for spouses, siblings, even children with chronic conditions. And in their eyes, she saw something familiar. Exhaustion, yes, but also resilience. She wasn't the only one walking this path. When it was her turn to speak, her voice shook, but she told them everything. About the promise, about the years of hiding, about the night he wandered off. And when she finished, no one judged her. Instead, someone simply said, "You're not alone." That broke her. In the best way. After that night, Clara started attending weekly. She didn't tell anyone else, still keeping her secret tightly guarded. But inside those meetings, she began to heal. She laughed for the first time in years. She even started writing again. Short stories, journal entries, memories of her father before the illness. It was like pieces of her identity were slowly returning, one by one, and every time she returned home, she looked at her father with new eyes. Not as a burden, but as the man who gave her the strength to become someone she never thought she could be. If this story has touched you even a little, hit the like button now and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Sometimes, just knowing we're not alone can change everything. Months passed and Clara's life settled into a new kind of rhythm. Her father's condition continued to decline, but there was more peace in their home now. The burden hadn't disappeared, but it no longer crushed her. There were still hard days when he didn't recognize her, days when he cried out for his wife who'd been gone for over a decade. But Clara no longer carried the weight in silence. She had found a voice. And more importantly, she had allowed herself to be seen, even if only in a small circle of strangers who had become like family. Then one evening, as she was reading to him from one of her old notebooks, something unexpected happened. He looked up at her, eyes suddenly clear, and whispered her name. Clara. Her heart stopped. It had been over 2 years since he'd last said it. She blinked, unsure if she'd imagined it, but then he smiled. Not a confused, distant smile, but one that carried recognition, warmth, and the faintest flicker of the man he used to be. For a brief moment, he was back. Her father. The real him. She didn't speak. She just took his hand and held it against her cheek, soaking in every second of that miracle. That night, she wrote in her journal for hours. Not about pain or exhaustion, but about hope. How even in the darkest seasons, light finds its way in, sometimes through a stranger in the rain, sometimes through a single whispered word. She wrote about resilience, about love that endures through silence, through forgetfulness, through time, and she realized something else. For 12 years, she had believed she was sacrificing her life for him. But maybe, in a way, he had been saving hers too. As winter turned into spring, Clara began to open up more. She invited her best friend over for coffee. The first time in years she'd let anyone past her front door. At first, her friend was shocked. By the truth. By the years of silence, by the sheer weight Clara had carried alone. But there was no judgment. Just tears, and hugs, and the beginning of a long overdue reconnection. Slowly, Clara let more people in. Not everyone understood, but the ones who mattered didn't need to. They simply stood by her side. One day, Ethan showed up again. This time she invited him in. They sat at the kitchen table drinking tea and talked about everything. Not just caregiving, but dreams, regrets, little joys. He told her that he always had a feeling there was more to her story. And she thanked him, not just for reaching out, but for seeing her when she had nearly disappeared. That moment didn't feel romantic. It felt sacred. Two people who had carried heavy things finding light in each other's presence. But deep down, Clara knew the end was near. Her father was sleeping more, eating less. His eyes, once flickering with confusion, were now calm, distant. She had prepared herself for this moment for years. But when the time came, nothing could have truly made her ready. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. The sun filtered softly through the curtains and the air inside the house felt still, almost sacred. Clara woke up earlier than usual, sensing something was different. She walked into her father's room and found him lying peacefully, his hands folded gently across his chest, his breathing slow but steady. She sat beside him, holding his hand like she had done so many times before, but this time was different. He opened his eyes for a brief moment, and though they no longer held recognition, they were calm, at peace. She whispered, "I'm here, Dad." You can rest now." And not long after, he took his final breath. There were no dramatic last words, no cinematic farewells, just silence. A silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Clara sat with him for hours, not crying at first, just sitting. The grief came in waves, and when it did, it came hard. But underneath the sorrow was something else. A strange, unexpected peace. She had done everything she promised. She had carried him, cared for him, protected him, loved him. All the way to the end. The days that followed were a blur. Funeral, arrangements, phone calls, paperwork. Clara moved through it like a ghost, supported by the very people she had once shut out. Her support group showed up. Ethan brought food. Her best friend stayed the night so she wouldn't be alone. And though the ache in her chest never left, she wasn't drowning in it. She was held. And for the first time in over a decade, she let herself be held. After the funeral, Clara stood in the empty house and realized she didn't know what came next. For 12 years, her life had revolved around someone else's needs. Now, all that was gone. She wasn't a caregiver anymore. She wasn't hidden, she was just Clara. And that realization was terrifying, but also quietly liberating. She packed up the house, keeping only a few cherished belongings, a photo of her parents, her father's old watch, and the notebook where she had written every moment worth remembering. She didn't leave town right away. Instead, she took time to breathe, to walk through the neighborhood as herself, not the invisible woman behind closed curtains. She started working part-time at the local library and began volunteering with families caring for loved ones at home. Her story, once hidden in shadows, became a light for others. She didn't speak of it with drama or self-pity, only truth. And in doing so, she gave others permission to speak theirs. Every year on the anniversary of his passing, Clara visits the same gas station where a kind stranger once helped her father. She lights a candle there and sits quietly for a few minutes, remembering not just his death but his life, his smile, his voice, and that one word he gave her near the end. Clara. 1 year turned into 2, then 3. Life didn't return to what it was, it became something entirely new. Clara still carried the grief, but it changed shape. It softened. It lived in the background of her days, no longer a weight, but a shadow that reminded her of love. She continued to write, and over time her journal entries turned into essays, and those essays into a book. She called it 12 Winters, a quiet tribute to the years that had shaped her soul in silence. It wasn't a bestseller, it wasn't meant to be, but the letters she received from readers, caregivers, daughters, sons, people who felt alone, meant more than any review ever could. Ethan remained in her life, a constant presence who never tried to fix her, only to understand. Their bond grew in small, patient steps. One evening, while sitting on a park bench beneath the fading light, he asked her what she wanted now. For the first time, Clara didn't answer with hesitation. "To live," she said, "for me. Not in hiding, not in fear, just fully." And that simple declaration felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she didn't even know she'd lost. She traveled for the first time in over a decade, not far, just a coastal town a few hours away. But standing by the ocean, hearing the waves and feeling the wind, Clara felt free. Not because she had left something behind, but because she had finally honored every part of the road that brought her here. The pain, the sacrifice, the love, all of it mattered. All of it made her who she was. And she wasn't ashamed of a single second. Years later, Clara became a counselor for families starting the caregiving journey. She didn't offer magic, solutions. She simply listened, the same way someone had once listened to her. Her story reminded people that dignity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the quiet act of showing up day after day, even when no one sees you. Especially then, and though her father was no longer with her, his presence never left. Sometimes she would catch herself saying things he used to say, laughing at jokes only he would have found funny. She kept his photo on her writing desk right beside her favorite pen. It wasn't grief anymore, it was memory. Love in its purest, gentlest form. Because in the end, Clara's story wasn't about loss. It was about devotion. About the kind of love that chooses silence over applause, sacrifice over recognition. And in that choice, finds something rare. The quiet, unshakable strength of a heart that never gave up. Clara's journey teaches us something deeply powerful, that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of love happen away from the spotlight. In a world obsessed with speed, visibility, and constant noise, she chose patience, chose presence. She chose to give everything she had, not for applause, but because her heart knew no other way. And in doing so, she discovered a truth that many never realize, that real strength isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the voice that whispers, "Keep going," when no one else sees your struggle. We often think of sacrifice as something grand, something that needs recognition to be validated. But Clara's story reminds us that love, when it's true, doesn't need witnesses. Her life wasn't wasted in the shadows. It was lived with meaning, with courage, with soul. And though she gave up many things along the way, she found something even more valuable: herself. Her story wasn't just about caregiving. It was about becoming. So if you're out there feeling invisible, forgotten, or worn down by a burden no one else can see, know this: your love matters. Your effort matters, and you are not alone. Just like Clara, you have more strength than you realize. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without letting us know. Like the video, leave a comment sharing your own story or someone who inspires you. And above all, subscribe for more stories that remind us of what really matters in this life: the quiet power of love.